Oh, hello, Neil. Speaking.
Obviously, we don't have the chair here today, so necessary.
All right, I'll nominate Zelinda as the
quorum.
yes, four. I'll nominate Zelinda to chair the meeting tonight. I'll put that. All those in favour? Aye. Those against? No. Okay. No, carried. You're in.
Thanks, Bill.
Thanks, Deputy.
Jason, do we have a marked up agenda?
Okay. I've got this one now. Right, let's run through it quickly. So, nothing needed. Second minutes, we're just moving.
Yes.
Yep. So go through all that.
Yeah, go through the apologies and leave of absence.
Yes. Do you know who it is? I'll just
We've
ask you to say.
got, here's the workshop.
Questions I'm asking too.
About sunset clauses during the discussion today.
Yeah. We don't have the. Yeah.
Oh, there's, oh, yeah, no, I'm just open it, so you go for it.
It's just the narrowness of the streets.
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody. So we'll open the meeting. Thanks, everybody who's here. I'd like to start with apologies and leave of absence, and I'll hand that over, Director.
Yes,
Thank you.
So we've got 3 apologies. We've got Alderman Bloomfield, we've got Councillor Dutta and Councillor Lohberger.
Thank you very much. I'd just like to do an acknowledgement of country. I would like to acknowledge the original custodians of the land on which the city of Hobart was built. I would also like to acknowledge the Palawa people of Tasmania who have survived invasion and dispossession and continue to maintain their culture, identity and rights. And at a time where we as a nation are trying to recognise our First Nations people, I think it's most pertinent that we do acknowledge our history and our First Nations people. Thank you. Number 1 is confirmation of minutes. Can I have somebody move that, please? Councillor Kitsos, thank you very much. Number 2, consideration of supplementary items. Oh, sorry, a vote on the minutes. All in favour?
Aye.
Aye. That's moved. Thank you very much and passed. Number 2, consideration of supplementary items. Being none, we'll move on to number 3, indications of pecuniary and conflicts of interest. Are there any? Being none, we will move to number 4, which is transfer of agenda items, and we don't have anything in the close to transfer. So we'll move on to number 5, which is planning authority items, consideration of items with deputations. And we have a deputations list today for item number 6.2.2, 9 Star Street, Sandy Bay, the visitor accommodation for 12 units. So that will actually put us into being acting as planning authority. Can we have somebody move that, please?
So moved.
Thank you so much. And those in favour?
Aye.
Aye. Those against? Being none, that's moved. And so we'll now bring that item 6.2.2 up for committee acting as a planning authority. And we have the representor. And we will start with that list first, which is Stephen Holt and the other Jeff Stump. Would you like to, with Mr Holt first? Stephen Holt, if you could come forward. You can just sit there if that's okay and bring the microphone towards you. You have a maximum of 5 minutes, and at 4 minutes 30 seconds you will be just given a warning that you have 30 minutes remaining, and any questions thereafter will follow. Thank you.
Actually, do you mind if I stand? I'm just used to standing if it's not picking up on the microphone.
Yeah, sure, no worries.
Well, thank you, Deputy Lord Mayor Sherlock, I think I've got that right, for allowing me to address this meeting. And I know that not the full complement of councillors are here, but I do know from what I've looked at that I'm addressing a group of people with a wide variety of impressive professional qualifications and achievements, and I know also that I'm addressing a group of people with expertise in town planning, such expertise going through the experience acquired by being a member of this council. So you'll, my wife said I shouldn't say this, you'll appreciate that I'm a little bit nervous appearing before you, and so I've written down what I intend to say. It's not very long, page and a half, I'll be well inside the 4-minute bell. Now, I'm guessing you're aware that the concerns of myself and my wife Vanessa, who's here with me, relate to the risk that the proposed development will create regarding the structural integrity of our home. But I also recognise that we're only at the town planning phase at the moment, and so the inquiry today concerns the application of the planning scheme and not the construction issues, although obviously a refusal today on planning grounds gets rid of the construction phase of the project, which would come in later, as I understand it, with the proposed council conditions where they're in approval, and there's also the Building Act detail about protection work. So those things I'm not going to address today, but I wanted to explain this is why we're concerned, and this is why we are astute to the terms and requirements of the planning scheme, and keen to see that the planning scheme is properly considered. I have an opinion about how it should be considered, but I don't. That's my opinion. Others may have different opinions. I think the determination which you'll make this afternoon can be expressed in simple terms, namely whether or not the proposal conforms with the planning scheme. My focus is on the Star Street frontage. The developer concedes that the acceptable solution for that frontage is not met, which brings us to the relevant performance criterion, which reads as follows, and you'll all have it there and be familiar with it, but I'm going to read it anyway. A dwelling must have a setback from a frontage that is compatible with the streetscape having regard to topographical constraints. In your deliberations, you'll need firstly to identify as a matter of fact what is the Star Street streetscape. The streetscape is comprised by all of the homes on the southwestern side being well set back from the street, and that's contrasted by all of the homes on the northeastern side being built up onto or close to the street. This is the streetscape. And I say this is a matter of fact derived from simple observation. It's not a matter of opinion. No expertise is required to get that far. Now, as to the relevant performance criteria, I'm sure you're all familiar with it, but I ask you to note the following. And I'm using the words in that performance criterion. The word must is mandatory, it's not discretionary. The word compatible has an entirely different meaning to the word acceptable. The two words are not synonyms and are not interchangeable. And 3, the consideration is confined to Star Street and does not extend to any other streets.
Sorry to interrupt, Mr. Holt. You have 30 seconds remaining. You have 30 seconds remaining. Sorry to interrupt.
Sorry, I better speed up. The planning report in the agenda papers reads as follows, and you'll see that at page 125, item 7.5. The proposed setback from the site Star Street frontage is considered acceptable, given that the setback of existing dwellings from this street varies and the proposed development is considered likely to have a stronger relationship with Jersey Street than Star Street. As is apparent, this is not the test under the scheme, and hence you've been left unaided by the planner's report and left unencumbered, free and required to make your own determination using your own experience and common sense and applying exactly what the scheme says.
That's time. Thank you.
Thank you.
You can sit down if you like. The elected members may have potential questions for you.
30 seconds to go, but I won't do it if I'm going to interfere with time requirements.
Thank you for your understanding. Are there any questions? Yes, Lord Mayor.
Yes, you didn't get to the issue that was in the paper today about the land issues. Can you...
Beg your pardon?
Were you the person that raised the issues in the Mercury today about the land slide issue?
Oh, yes, yeah. I've had a look at that, a fairly close look, spoken to engineers, and
so
I know a little bit about that.
There, because that you're above this place, aren't you? So
Yeah.
it wouldn't affect you necessarily.
Yes.
Oh, you think it would still?
Yep. I don't know whether anybody's been to the site, but no. But our house presents as a 3-storey house if you stand on Jersey Street and look up.
Right.
Now, the proposal, as you know, Lord Mayor, is to excavate the whole of the block to make it effectively a flat block. And the engineer's report says that'll be an 8-metre cut at the top end of a common boundary between our house and the block, and that his tentative view is that a soldier piled wall would be appropriate. He calls it a soldier pile wall.
Right.
Now, my research, well, firstly, you've got dolerite boulders. You cannot pile drive, run an auger or a drill through a dolerite boulder. That's what I've been told by an engineer. So, and there are these scattered boulders up to 3 metres in width. So if you were to look at the engineer's report and they say, oh, we'll put in this piled soldier wall first, then you've got to go down for the, he says, 8 metres plus another 4 or 5 into the sandstone. So that's getting holes, 13 metres down. You need them about 1.5 metres apart for each pile. The common boundary is about 40 metres. So that equates to about 30 holes. If you're not Tax Lotto lucky, then at some points the person pile driving the hole is going to hit a boulder. And then, even though the site isn't secured, the bulldozer driver has to come on, do some excavation and expose the boulder. This, I'm saying, my understanding, right? And I'm not an engineer. And then, if you do that, oh, and I should add, the person drilling the hole, the best way to reduce vibrations, which is another concern for us, is to soak the land with water. So you're soaking it with water, drilling holes or pile driving holes, and then you need a bulldozer driver to expose this boulder that's going to need to be removed. And you're in this, what's it called, hazard landslip area. Now, you've got a slope, this pretty steep slope, 20 to 26 degrees for most of it, 35 degrees right at the bottom next to Bay Higher. So if these boulders, with the lateral landslip, and I think the other one was, I've forgotten what he called it, that Mr Temlett for the developer has for the more substantial landslip, if these boulders roll down the hill, before this soldier pile driven wall is constructed, then our house is exposed. We do not have anything to support our house. It's 3 stories. It's about 7 metres from the common boundary from where they're going to make this excavation. It's solid brick. It was built in double brick. It was built in 1937, doesn't have a crack in it. That concerns me. You cannot eliminate the vibrations while you're driving piles or drilling or whatever it is. And the vibrations, the intensity of them is greatest at the closest points. We're well within the high intensity zone. The amplitude of the vibrations moves outwards the further away you get. So it affects a bigger area beyond our house, but not with the same intensity. Now, I see a risk of our house being damaged either 1, through the vibrations with the pile driving, or 2, because an excavation has to commence before the soldier piled wall is in, and 3, because from what I've seen, maximum height is about 5 metres, not the 8 proposed. And you need dry, stable soil, even if you're only going to 5 metres. So that's why my wife and I are very worried about what would happen if this ultimately came to fruition during the construction phase. I think I've answered your question.
Yes, just wondering about, I can't see what it is, and this is where it would have been good to come on site. Number 4 Jersey Street. Were you around when that was built? Because that's just below you.
Is that the one next to Bay Higher?
It's next to the site.
Can I? There are some. Oh right, there are some aerials. If you look, can you see? I can't see from there, Lord Mayor. I'm sorry. I didn't bring my papers with me.
That's right. So that's the site, and that's your place, I think.
That's our place with the swimming pool.
Yeah, and then
that's the site. That's called.
Number 4 Jersey.
Yeah, that's called Grosvenor Apartments.
Yes.
It's a 5-storey building.
Yeah.
So it's at the same risk we are from vibrations and landslip.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody made a representation from there, but I don't know. As far as I can see, there's not a single crack in it. My guess from the architecture of the building is that it was probably constructed mid to late 60s or early 70s, so it's stood there without getting any cracks in it for many years. There's a penthouse on top, and then there are 3 levels of apartments, each containing, I think, 4, or was it 5 apartments?
So is that sort of a similar scale and issues as the one that's being proposed, or do you see it very differently?
It's on different land, so it presents from the street front as a 5-storey building, but if you go to the back of it, it presents as a 1 or 2-storey building. That's to say it respects the slope of the land and follows it through benching. Now, for what it's worth, my view about the site is that it's perfectly suited to 2 houses, perhaps more. You do an excavation at Jersey Street, put a suspended, for the garage, double garages, you put a suspended concrete slab on that, you then bench and have your living room, kitchen, guest bathroom, and use the roof of the garage for your balcony, and then you bench once more coming up towards our fence at the top of the hill, and you put in a couple of bedrooms and another bathroom. And you build 2 houses like that. It's not going to cause any of these engineering problems at the moment, or certainly not as many that I can foresee. And so, and it's residential, not visitor accommodation. How I know the scheme says visitor accommodation is permitted, but there has been a lot of publicity about permanent residential, be it rental or ownership, is in a bit of short supply in Hobart, and some of this might be attributable to investors thinking that visitor accommodation is a better payer. But your question was about Grosvenor Apartments next door. But that, if you do go and have a look, you'll see it respects the slope of the land and has benching, not dig a big hole and just and then pretend you're on a flat block and build a 4-storey building. So.
Thank you. Next we have Councillor Harvey.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Holt. It's a tricky site, and I'm just I know the site very well. I used to live in Grosvenor Street on the bridge.
Oh, right, yeah.
I know how narrow the bridge is and the sloping of the road.
Yeah. And the bridge has a weight limit. You know that as well. Trying to get a bulldozer over that, good luck.
I'll be talking to that soon. I just can't. I can't see the way you can pile. How do you pile? Do you pile from your land over the fence, or do you pile from? Do you have to build a? This is a building question, though, not a planning question, so I probably shouldn't ask it.
I'll be getting no permission to come on my land.
Yeah.
I'll be straight down to the Supreme Court asking for injunctions.
Yeah.
At the first sign of trouble, they will get no assistance from me. I can say that with absolute certainty.
And the piling would need to occur right on the bottom of your corner, on your Star Street corner.
Now, I think the Lord Mayor had a photo of our house, and the fence between our house and the block is about 40 metres long.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I'm looking at the
entire length that will have the piling. Now, I would have thought that with the excavation, you would also need some land containment to stop number 4 Jersey Street, the Grosvenor Apartments, from sliding into a hole. And so even though the engineer hasn't mentioned that, I really can't see how you could just do it without retaining that land. Yeah. And that 3 metres in from Grosvenor Apartments is occupied by a couple of private drainage easements we have and a council.
Yeah, no, I'm aware where they are and that. Anyway, I probably shouldn't be asking questions about the engineering side of it. That's a question for the council. But I know the site really well. I know how steep it is. But I also know that it's been sitting vacant for a very long time, for decades. Yeah. Anyway, sorry, I probably didn't need to.
For decades, it was where our house is. Originally, we were on 2,300 square metres, and that was on 2 separate titles, but they each ran parallel to Star Street all the way down to Jersey Street. Now, we did, well, technically it's called a boundary adjustment, not a subdivision, but that's what we did. So we turned our 2 blocks into 2 that now you'd say are parallel to Jersey Street. And the reason we did that is we had lots of trees on that block, but the garden was horrendous to maintain.
I know, yeah.
And it wasn't usable outdoor space because it was just too steep to have a pleasant area to sit or, have a barbecue or something. And so we did that I think we got the subdivision approval in 2015, got the title, I think it was October, November 2016, sold that block of land to a West Australian couple yet to be married. They proposed building a house, their family home on it, and would have done that. I understood anecdotally that unfortunately they broke up, so we sold the block for $500,000. They then sold it to the current owner, I think it must have been 2019, for $600,000, and then the current owner immediately went down this path, firstly with the idea that they would be 12 permanent accommodation units, and has put it on the market based on, here's a block of land and it's worth more than you'd otherwise think because attached is a planning permit. And I think that explains the lack of development in part. They want to sell it with a planning permit to get a premium price. And two, and this is just my opinion, it's neither technically nor economically feasible to do what they're proposing. I'll say this, it's a little unkind. They're possibly hoping for a buyer who doesn't do their due diligence and thinks, oh, well, I can build a 5-storey building on this. And even if they get a planning permit, I don't think they can, but that's...
Okay, well, thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Councillor Kitsos.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I just need to talk to the microphone, unfortunately, which makes
sorry.
it harder. But look, my question to Mr Holt is if some of his fears would be alleviated if there was a condition placed by Council to get some more engineering reports based around his concerns and his adjoining block.
To be frank, I don't care less about the reports and the conditions. At the end of the day, you're going to have a bloke in a sleeveless singlet driving a bulldozer or driving piles in, and the engineer is not going to be on site all of the time. And none of that will appease me, no matter how many reports they get or how stringent the conditions are. At the end of the day, there'll be a person on the bulldozer on the block, and without an engineer there, and because they're wise to worldly affairs, as in the human nature, they'll just do what they think is a good idea. And it's too late. One scoop, the boulder's exposed, half the block falls down the hill into Bay Hire, it's all too late. Now, and then the insurance company will say, oh, we only gave insurance on the basis, this is under the Building Act, we only gave insurance on the basis that the engineering plans had been complied with. Bad luck, because they weren't. Or you get that proportionate liability litigation where everybody joins everybody else in as defendants. So you've got the geologist, the engineer, the bulldozer driver, whoever else, and you've got 6 defendants, and then it takes 5 years and is extremely expensive to get any litigated outcome. So thank you for your question, and I understand what you're saying, but I take absolutely no comfort from conditions, no matter how well drafted they might be. And I'll just add to that, I'm not 100% sure how that condition, such as, but nobody will stay in there for more than 3 months, how that's ever going to be looked at or enforced. I reckon you'll have a building full of people staying there for more than 3 months and no private open space. None of the things the scheme would say if you're going to be there for other than short term. Now, I don't know how council would manage this. If it was found out and you found evidence, you'd probably, issue a notice, and then they'd have to apply for a change of use permit. Then you'd say, well, you can't have 12 anymore, you can only have 6 if it has to be residential. They'll say fine, and then all that might go through, and then 2 months later, deadlocks are put on the doors, and in reality you've got 12, not 6. So I'm sceptical. Cynical on these sort of things, and I'm not confident that the role of conditions can alleviate the potential problems we're perceiving. Now, I don't care less if they use it for visitor I don't care less about the as-built, to be honest with you.
Thank you very much. Were there any further questions for Mr Holt? No? Being none, thank you very much, Mr Holt. Greatly appreciated. You can go back to your seat now. Thank you so very much.
Thank you very much, Deputy Lord Mayor.
And we will now call upon Mr Jeff Stump to make his representation. Mr Stump, likewise, you have 5 minutes to say your deputation, and at 4 minutes 30 I will let you know that you have 30 seconds remaining. Thank you.
Thank you. My name's Jeff Stump, and I'm the owner of 131 Sandy Bay Road, which backs onto Jersey Street and is opposite the frontage, the Jersey Street frontage of 9 Star Street. And I'm not sure whether everyone's seen the article in today's paper, but the rock that's photographed is against my wall in Jersey Street. And just as a matter of interest, there is an error in that report in that they say that the site is 500 metres from my boundary. That is not so. It would be closer to about 30 metres. So it's how that error crept in, I do not know, but it's about, I would say 30 metres would be all it would be between my back wall and the boundary of 9 Jersey Street along Star Street. But, and I made a representation regarding 9 Star Street, and I have similar concerns about the engineering of the piling. I have something of a building background, and so it is quite clear to me that it's a pretty marginal way of going about using that site to have 8 metre high. I think it might even be, I think overall the drilling will have to be about 13 metres deep from the top of the site in order to accommodate the piles, and that to me is out of order. And I guess I'd like the opportunity to see if the committee has this whole project in perspective. The extent of the excavation is enormous. There will be, I mean, I won't tie this down to the last number, but basically the volume of the excavation is in thousands of cubic metres of excavation, and that's, say, something like 400 truckloads, and each truck fully loaded truck weighs about 20 tonnes. So you've got 400 20-tonne truckloads going up and down that little narrow suburban street, which is, it's just out of order. I consider that it's just a totally inappropriate site for the proposal because of the extent of the excavation that's necessary. And I could leave that point. The planning assessment report doesn't recognise the commercial aspect of the use of Jersey Street, in my opinion. Pardon me. I'm concerned that the business of Bay Hire uses their commercial vehicles from that business using the Jersey Street all the time, and I'd like to think, particularly as a ratepayer, that a decision will certainly take into account that the commercial business will get just an understanding. I'm not asking for any special treatment, but I'd like to be considered as contributing to the commercial atmosphere of the area, and to get some recognition. Now, the other thing is that I think is a real problem is that Jersey Street is a narrow, dead-end street, and in order to get trucks to the Jersey Street boundary of 9 Star Street, trucks cannot turn, so they can't drive in. That means every truckload, and there's going to be something like 400.
Sorry, Mr Stump, you have 30 seconds remaining. Thank you.
Every truckload would have to back along that narrow street and around across a narrow bridge to get to the site, which I think you would recognise backing a tandem truck or more importantly, 400 tandem trucks over is going to be a big ask.
Thank you very much. Were there any questions? Yes, Councillor Harvey.
Yeah, could you just elaborate on what size trucks currently use the site, like bay hire? I don't think they have any large trucks.
Oh, no. I'm sorry if there's some, I perhaps didn't express it very well. The trucks I'm referring to are those that are involved in the carting away of the soil which is excavated from the site.
Yeah.
Bay hire would be mostly just utility-sized vehicles, and the same as customers, sometimes vans and things, but no connection with heavy trucks from bay hire.
And what council truck currently collects the garbage in that street, do you know? Is it a normal sized truck or a smaller truck?
I have heard it mentioned. I believe that it's a smaller truck that backs down, but I've never experienced it. It was just that I heard it mentioned in conversation.
The questions?
Can you tell me, thank you. Can you tell me a little bit about I didn't actually read the article in detail, so tell me a little bit about the rock that you're talking about, that story.
Well, the rock that was photographed is that big, and that just makes people ask the questions. Okay, the geological survey of the site reports that it could be expected that during the excavation that they will uncover large floater rocks up to 3 metres in size, which could weigh, I mean, I'm a bit dubious myself, 40 tonnes, but nonetheless uncovering a large rock halfway up that slope by an excavator, if there's no way an excavator can grab it, if it starts to roll down and it weighs even 5 tonnes, it'll certainly go straight through the back wall of Bay Hire.
Right, and the one that you've got, where did that come from? You said
that came from the site. It just spontaneously rolled off the bank and rolled across the Jersey Street and down against the wall. And I mean, what it's done is it's illustrated that a little rock like that, if it were large number of tonnes, even, I mean, I don't believe 40 tonnes, but if it was 5 tonnes and it took off down that slope, followed the same path as the small rock, it would certainly find its way halfway through Bay Hire. There's no doubt about that.
And were you around when 4 Jersey Street was built?
No, I did know the builder of it many years ago, but I didn't. I think he built it before I actually had an interest in the area. It was just pure coincidence that I happened to know him.
But do you consider that to be a similar site? 9 Star Street? Or
well, I think it's lower down. I've never really taken much notice of it. It's only when I've looked at this proposal and realised that it's such a steep slope, and it really is from an engineering point of view, it's a difficult site to do anything with, and I have reservations about the actual ability to complete the piling without striking rocks. I just cannot see how they're going to achieve it. So, but I suppose I would appreciate it if this matter could have a decision deferred until it's possible to take into account the commercial aspect of the use of Jersey Street, which presently isn't taken account of.
Oh, right. So you're saying that the report doesn't do that adequately?
I don't believe it does. I'd like to know more about how important the commercial aspect of the use is, because there only appears to be reference to pedestrians and residential type use.
Apart from yourself, who else is a commercial operator in that area, using that area?
Well, I'm not actually the owner of the business.
I see. Right.
It's I did establish that business like the Bayhire has been in existence for 50 years and has operated for that period of time. But I sold the business probably 20 odd years ago or more.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you very much. Were there any further questions? No, being none, thank you very much. I appreciate it. You can go back to your seat. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Mr Stumpton. Now we will have a deputation from the applicant, Phil Guttrell. Thank you very much. Likewise, you have 5 minutes, and at 4 minutes 30, I shall let you know that you have 30 seconds. Thank you so much.
Excellent, thank you. Thanks for the opportunity to speak tonight. As you would be aware, the council officers have done a comprehensive assessment of the application and have recommended approval. The design of this building is almost identical to the building that was previously eventually approved on the site, which was for residential development. That application was initially refused based on issues relating to provision of private open space, dwelling density primarily. Those issues were resolved and that application was approved via consent. Since that time, as has been alluded to by some of the representors, the site's been sort of sitting there and our client who owns the site is looking at redeveloping the site, similar built form for visitor accommodation. I'd just like to take a chance to just address some of the concerns that have been raised. We understand that the site is a tricky one, and hence we've gone out and got the reports necessary to address the provisions of the planning scheme as they relate to excavation, namely. The client has spoken to their builder and they've had a preliminary look at the designs and they are confident that they can come up with the detailed design and so forth to enable the site to be developed. Following any permit issued tonight, there's obviously a very detailed building permit process that must be addressed. And that will require significant additional documentation to be developed to address the conditions, or the draft conditions on the draft permit. And that will go into a lot more detail around the details on excavation and getting vehicles to the site and all of those elements, including a detailed construction management plan. And that deals with a lot of these issues that have been raised, or will deal with a lot of the issues raised regarding the excavation of the site. That's all I've got at the moment. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions from elected members? Yes, Councillor Posselt and then Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Guttrell, for coming in as always. It's not the first time we've seen you. This is the first time that we've seen a development application like this under visitor short stay permits. Why did the applicant not apply either for residential and then seek permits once the building was built, or alternatively apply for a motel?
Look, the initial application that was lodged was originally for the same configuration, so 12 apartments, and they were all going to be residential. As a result of the planning process and the subsequent appeal, that yield was reduced down to 6. 6 apartments, and that was to provide the necessary or additional private open space per apartment, and also deal with the density issue. So once that was done, there was certainly an understanding that because of the site and the amount of works that would be required, there's obviously going to be quite a significant cost associated with doing that. And at the time, the client advised us that the costs of developing the site and then individually selling those 6 units, the yield wouldn't necessarily be enough to essentially cover the costs of the development. That was sort of around 2020, and it wasn't long sort of after that we sort of went into COVID and so forth, and that's why the site's sort of been sitting where it has. This proposal for, again, the 12 units, but in the visitor accommodation configuration, means that you don't have people staying there don't have people living there permanently, and therefore those requirements around private open space and the issue around density is essentially addressed by that different use. The apartments are configured in a way that down the track, if there was a desire to turn the building into residential, that some of those departments could essentially be joined together and reconfigured. So that's an opportunity that the client may have in the future. And I note that Council's draft permit has including a condition at the moment to say that if an approval is granted tonight, it is just for visitor accommodation, and we recognise that any change to residential down the track will require another application for a change of use.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, just to follow up, it's really pleasing to hear that design element has been included, that conversion is potentially possible. But the second, I guess, component to my first question was, why is it not a motel then? If it's a commercial short stay premises, why is it not applied? Why is the application? It might be a question better for our staff, but why is the application not treated, in your view, as a motel?
A motel sort of falls under the broader definition of visitor accommodation, and those separate definitions, which include motel, holiday unit, there's a number of other sort of definitions or subcategories, and they're often used then to work out things like car parking requirements that differ and various other requirements, but it falls under that broader visitor accommodation component. And a lot of the sort of visitor accommodation developments that I've certainly been involved with don't normally go down that sort of motel or traditional motel path where you sort of have the units and you drive into your parking space out the front, that type of thing. So it's a little bit of a different model, but it essentially functions very similar to that type of an arrangement.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yes, Councillor Kitsos.
Just, I guess, an add-on to the previous question, to my microphone. I'm just wondering, with the area of a motel, is that then assessed as commercial rather than residential or visitors accommodation?
The subcategories that fall under visitor accommodation, they are all essentially considered, I guess you'd say, commercial, given that they don't come with the exact same sort of requirements that you would expect for residential development, for example, like things like private open space. Under residential, there's also a higher requirement for car parking. There's a requirement for visitor parking as well. There's quite a few differences between residential and visitor accommodation that makes that distinction.
And again, I presume between the commercial use of a motel to visitor accommodation.
Yeah, so again, those two, it falls under that broader category of visitor accommodation. So the way that this proposal has been designed and the way it's intended to be operated is similar to a motel. But I guess one of the other sort of differences you'd expect with a traditional motel is that you might have a reception area on site, for example, that you check in with, whereas in this instance, check-in will be done online via platforms like Airbnb potentially, but there will still be, as outlined in the draft visitor management plan, there'll still be someone who is assigned to manage the property. They just won't be necessarily on site all the time, but they'll be on call to attend the site if any issues arise, or to manage guests and so forth in accordance with the management plan.
Thank you very much. Councillor Harvey.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I've got 3 points I'd like to clarify. Currently, I know it's a Grosvenor Street, so at that end is one lane and parking on one side. The council garbage trucks are small garbage trucks that service the area, and they have to reverse down the street and then reverse around the bend across the bridge. What would be the impact on the parking and traffic in Grosvenor Street during the excavation and construction phase? Would all the parking in Grosvenor Street need to be removed? Has that work been done?
The traffic impact assessment submitted with the application does provide some consideration of the surrounding streets and the traffic generation by the proposed development once it's operating. Normally, and with a lot of similar sorts of applications, the conditions that have been put on the permit, one of which includes a detailed construction traffic management plan that has to be submitted before any works can normally occur on the site. And that details...
I'm specifically referring to the parking in Grosvenor Street, which I think would probably need to be removed during the entire, or during construction hours, because no truck will be able to get down the street. And I know the bridge really well, and a truck would need complete width of the road in order to swing around that bridge, and it wouldn't be possible to put a trailer around it. Well, probably could with a great driver, but I'm concerned that the inability to actually do this work and how that impacts this into the whole project. If you can't get trucks into the site, and I don't know of any other sites in Hobart that have been so contained or restrained as this site. I know there's sites that are just as steep, but they've had access from multiple sides, where this really, you've only got access from Jersey Street, and you've got a business operating that park vehicles in that street as well. So what's the plan for the Bay Hire, for example? How would they accommodate the excavation work over a period of months?
Yeah, look, as I said, these details are obviously important and certainly go to the constructability of the development, but they're normally addressed in a lot of detail as part of that condition endorsement process, and that all needs to be worked out before final building approvals and so forth can actually be signed off, before any works can actually occur on site. So that would include looking at those parking arrangements on Jersey Street and on Grosvenor Street, and the concerns that have been raised by the representors in terms of the capacity of the bridge and so forth as well. All of those things will definitely need to be looked at, and they will be detailed in those documents that then have to be approved by council and reviewed by engineers, prepared by engineers, to ensure that all of that work can actually occur and limit potential impacts on surrounding properties.
All right, and the last one, Chair. What dimensions do you have for the car parks below the development and also on the Star Street corner? Are the dimensions for those car parks for standard cars or for large SUVs?
Just 1 second there, I'll have a look at our dimensions. The parking spaces accessed off Star Street, those will have minimum widths of 2.5 metres because they've had to be arranged in a manner to ensure that they don't overhang out into a portion of the right-of-way. The lengths are at or above the requirements under the Australian standard, and that's the same case for the parking spaces accessed off Jersey Street.
So they're current Australian standards for an average car?
Yeah, so the majority of
not an SUV like we're driving today, Rams and
yeah, so
50 Fords.
There's effectively the what we call the B85, which is the sort of standard vehicle, and then there's the B99, which caters for those larger sort of 99th percentile vehicles like those Ram trucks and so forth. So those turn paths and dimensions to fit those types of vehicles, for certain developments, they are certainly considered and factored into the design. But for most developments, the standard B85 is the type most used because it represents the majority or the more likely size and type of vehicle that's going to access a given property depending on the use that's been proposed.
Except that 55% of new car purchases at the moment are SUVs, and South Australia is looking at making garages bigger because everyone's getting annoyed with these big cars on the street. So the standard will change as everyone, look, you say everyone starts driving bigger cars, but anyway, I digress. But I think it is an important point though about standards into the future, and I'll get the director to solve it for us.
Thank you, Councillor Harvey. Were there any further questions? Yes, Lord Mayor.
Yeah, I'm still really a bit unclear about this issue of motel versus visitor accommodation and why it isn't a commercial property.
Well, in my understanding, the use of a motel is a subcategory under visitor accommodation, and this application is for visitor accommodation, so it's not residential development. And if you have a property like this that is being used on a commercial basis, then of course it's not the same as, for example, the business across the road, Bay Hire. It's not commercial in that regard, but it's commercial in terms of it's being used for profit. It's not being used for residential purposes.
In that sense, the use allows for a commercial development, the zone.
Yeah, that's right, yeah. So there's, as I said before, there's different types of visitor accommodation that might be managed in different ways. Most of the visitor accommodation proposals that we look at are generally hotels and so forth, which sort of still broadly fall under that category as well. But there's also apartment buildings and so forth that may have been originally residential, for example, and then are converted to serviced apartments, which also falls under that visitor accommodation category, where you have apartments similar to these, where you have your bathroom and kitchen and so forth, and that they're used on a commercial basis for profit.
Are there any further questions? No, being none, thank you very much. You can go
Thank
back
you.
to your seat. Thank you. Right, so I will now open it up. Would somebody like to move that, or no? Somebody want to have more discussions, some more questions for the director?
I'll have a go. Through you, Chair, to the director. How this project gets built is not part of our deliberation today because we're looking at the planning scheme and not the building and engineering elements of it prior to construction.
Yeah, through you, Chair. Well, that's correct to a point, but I think the legitimate concerns have been raised, and we have imposed relevant conditions around those matters to satisfy ourselves prior to issuing any building consent that in fact it can be built, importantly without compromising, without issues relating to land instability, and that construction, traffic can access the site.
Do we have a condition that the bridge over the Sandy Bay rivulet is photographed and any damage to that bridge will be rectified?
All those matters around the bridge capacity and the like will be considered as part of that assessment process that the officers will undertake, dealing with that condition of approval.
And that will also include the potential to clear Grosvenor Street in order for large vehicles to access the site.
All of those matters will need to be considered in terms of accessibility. What is the implication for on-street parking to achieve that, and how are vehicles actually going to access the site? And
the implications of pile driving, through you, Chair, on that site, I can't see how it all comes together to actually get a machinery in there to drive piles. Any vibrations associated with that are covered through the insurance of the builders and through the insurance of who? Not us. If it causes damage to property in the vicinity, how does that work?
That's all covered under the Building Act, and it's not a matter for us as the planning authority to necessarily involve itself in, but there are condition reports, condition requirements around that process that builders and are required to undertake, and clearly to protect the interests, the rightful protection of interests of neighbouring properties.
And that also includes protecting the interest of bay hire, for example, that regularly, well, there's traffic that goes to and from bay hire all day.
Yeah.
How do we protect their interest? I know they have entry from Sandy Bay Road, but there's a circularity to their business. How do you protect that sort of interest when you've got a blocked road with probably multiple tip trucks collecting loads to drive out? How do you, I know it'll be conditioned somehow, and I don't know, and it's not a part of the planning scheme.
Yeah, and
Answer my own question.
Yes, I don't want to speculate on what that arrangement might be. That's the purpose of the condition, and for the proponent to come up with a solution that does not unreasonably impair access to that road ongoing during the construction phase. Clearly, it's a public road, and we want to ensure that it remains a public road and accessible for people that need to access it. How they configure the construction and vehicles accessing and leaving the site, that's a matter for the proponent to work through and to satisfy council as the planning authority and the road authority.
And if they can't meet those challenges, what's the implications for that? Or is there always a solution?
I would hope that there was a solution, otherwise we wouldn't be imposing the condition. So it's a matter for the proponent to ultimately come up with that solution, and what that might be, I don't want to speculate on that.
Because, Chair, my concern is all of those things, which is not part of the planning application. So from a planning application perspective, the council, the officers have said that this is acceptable, that it's recommended for approval, but this other stuff troubles me, you know. So, but they're not grounds for refusal, though, are they?
Well, no, they're not. So far as the constructability of the proposal is not a grounds for refusal. Ultimately, if council chose to use those grounds, then they would clearly be challenged in the planning appeal, and we couldn't legally defend them because there's no basis under the scheme so far as the constructability or not of the proposal.
So should this be agreed tonight, should we have a approval recommendation, or sorry, a refusal recommendation? Yep. You don't see any way that this could be defended in the tribunal?
Not so far as the constructability.
No, but from a planning perspective, with regard to the approval recommendation tonight, if that was refused, what do you think might happen?
Well, clearly the officers are of the opinion, hence why the recommendation, based on the qualified advice, that it should be approved. Now, due to the fact that there are a number of conditions pertaining to the application, it's the council or the planning authority clearly has the right to refuse the application based on those discretions, and it would have the right to try and defend those grounds of refusal at the Planning Appeal Tribunal if they were challenged.
And how often have we been able to successfully challenge or defend, I should say, a council decision to overturn the officer's decision? Have we successfully defended many of them in the tribunal?
Your success rate has not been great against officers' recommendations, although you have had some successes over the years that I've been working at council, but they are very rare. But you know, clearly there are a number of discretions related to this proposal that council could choose to try and exercise their rights to refuse and rely on that.
Thank you, Chair. That's enough for me now.
Lord Mayor and then Councillor Kitsos, thank you.
Director, if I was to ask for reasons for refusal, I presume that would include all of the items sort of listed sort of around where it doesn't meet the acceptable solution.
Yeah.
So we've got vulnerable use, there's no acceptable solution for the proposed, it's in a landslip area. We've got E3 7.3 major works, there's no acceptable solution for clause which applies where major works are proposed in a landslide hazard area. And it says the proposal includes major works as greater than 100 square metres in cut volume required to carry out the proposed development, and the site is within the landslide hazard area. The proposal does not comply with the above acceptable solution, therefore relies on the performance criteria. And then all we've got for the performance criteria is sort of like, oh yeah, it's probably okay. Yeah. But I mean those are they're pretty significant things from my perspective. I just watched something on TV last night about a big landslip in Victoria, and I'm sure it's not necessarily the same sort of environment, but where something doesn't meet the acceptable solution in a high landslide area, to me that seems like that would be a condition for refusal that was fairly serious.
Well, most definitely, but you would have to rely on qualified advice before the tribunal to defend that position. At the moment, we've got qualified advice that from the proponent that has been reviewed by council's officers that suggests that it is acceptable. Now, I put together some potential grounds of refusal for your consideration if you're of the mind to refuse it, that you might be able to defend before the tribunal, but clearly the officer's position is that it should be approved, but I can...
Could we have a look at them? Have you got them?
Yes, Craig, could you have them?
Just interested to know how many there are, obviously.
Yes.
Yeah. And what they cover. It's just the two, was it?
Just the two, I think. Craig, can you go? I think that's correct. Yeah, two prepared matters. One dealing... sorry, Michael, if you can just...
Three, Chair. So the first was dealing with the non-compliance with the building envelope. And then the second, with respect to Planning Directive 6, talking about the use of visitor accommodation.
Explain that second one a bit more.
So under PD6, acceptable solution 1, it talks about must not be in buildings with a gross floor area of not more than 200 square metres. And so this is the case that it is greater than 200 square metres in totality. The option would be under P1, where it is not compatible with the character and use of the area and must not cause an unreasonable loss of residential amenity, having regard to there's 6 sub-clauses there that potentially could be pointed to.
Have we taken a visitor accommodation case on that the size one before? Because that's one of the clearest parts of PD6 in a way, isn't it? It says if it's over this size. Have we taken one? It was.
I can't speak to detail. I believe there was some Smith Street, a collection of terrace houses that they were went to appeal over strata uses.
Yeah, I think we ultimately, council ultimately refused that one, and they amended or
They brought them back individually, I think, didn't they?
yeah.
Okay. So nothing, in terms of the landslip stuff, not considered a strong reason for refusal.
Well, you'd have to have qualified advice, and
Yeah.
I'm concerned that we don't have that.
Yeah, so we've got the
before us.
proponent's advice, don't we?
That's correct, and that has been reviewed by council officers and as satisfied.
I dare say this part 2 was pretty weak because it's surrounded by commercial accommodation. You've got a large hotel and you've also got short stay down the end of Jersey Street.
Yeah, it is. I suppose that one, this is an unusual
My old
proposal.
house in Grosvenor Street is also short stay now.
Yeah. This is a little bit unusual because you're talking about 12 new individual short stay visitor accommodation. So, but it is challenging under that planning directive to get a refusal up. We've endeavoured to do that on several occasions without much success. But this is a somewhat unusual one.
Technically, if there was a recommendation for refusal, we wouldn't be able to defend our own case. We'd need to engage consultants to do that for us, and we've had issues with trying to get consultants in the past.
That's correct.
Thank you. Councillor Kitsos. Sorry, Lord Mayor, did you have any further questions?
No, but I think that's the first one relates to the scale and sighting outside the envelope, and some of the traffic ones also don't seem to meet the acceptable solution as well, but.
Again,
which is what Councillor Harvey's kind of raised as,
Again, we've obviously had qualified advice from the proponent, and we've had our own traffic engineers review it and are satisfied, particularly around the ongoing use of the site. But clearly there are issues around the construction phase. But we feel that the applicant should be given an opportunity to prove that as part of the condition of approval.
Thank you. Councillor Kitsos.
Thank you, Chair. Through you to the Director, I'm interested in the qualified advice that we're referring to in regards to the landslip criteria. I'm just wondering if it's possible to defer this application until we seek our own qualified advice rather than the proponents in this case?
Yes. Well, the application expires on the 31st of January, so we've got limited time in which to do that. Clearly, we wouldn't be able to get independent advice in relation to that issue prior to that time.
Seek an extension of time?
We could, but I'm not sure. That would be dependent on the applicant agreeing to that. We could have that advice peer reviewed, but that would be that would take time to procure that consultant and for that consultant to undertake that work.
I mean, it's certainly a concerning part of this application for me. My other question to you, Director, through the Chair, is in relation to visitor accommodation and the possibility of imposing a sunset clause on this type of application. So I believe that visitor accommodation permits can have a sunset clause. applied. The background to that question is I'm concerned that the landscape of visitor accommodation will change in the future, and we're sort of signing up here for visitor accommodation in perpetuity. And although the design allows for a reduction in units, I think that that's an unlikely case, and I'm also concerned about compliance, the ability of council to monitor the compliance of the 3 months limitation applied with the permit. So a sunset clause is quite appealing to me.
Yeah. Look, I think such a clause, given the investment, would be an unreasonable condition to impose. And I think it would be rightfully challenged before the appeal tribunal. And I think arguably it's, you could argue that it's tantamount to refusal, the application, if the time frame was unreasonable. Clearly it's a significant investment, and you were imposing that you can only have it for a year or 2 years. I would argue that that's unreasonable.
Sure. I guess I'm curious then to follow up with what compliance we can do to make sure that the conditions on the permit are being adhered to.
Well, so far as use is concerned, well, in terms of the management of the activity, there's a management plan required. In terms of the issue of a situation where they're not being occupied for short-stay visitor accommodation, there's very, very little we can do on a day-to-day basis unless it's brought to our attention. So it's not practical for us to be monitoring on a regular basis that use. Now, clearly they'll be rated as visitor accommodation, and which is a higher rating level. So if they were to change the use, it would be in their financial interest to change the planning approval accordingly. So that would be in their interest to do that, I would imagine. But it's very difficult to enforce, to monitor that on a regular basis.
Well, I guess, that for me typifies what's very frustrating about this application, that their planning scheme just allows for this particular type of development that is neither residential nor commercial in nature in my mind, but sits somewhere in the middle as visitor accommodation. And, we've heard today that to meet the residential requirements it needed to drop from 12 to 6, which makes it commercially unviable. So we've now found another way to apply for essentially the same thing under a different category, which allows this to largely meet the requirements of the planning scheme, which makes our job immensely difficult, I think. And I do have concerns that the second recommendation on the screen referring to use in the area is difficult for the reasons pointed out by Councillor Harvey, that there is other accommodation uses in that area. So, I mean, it's just really disappointing that we still continue to have this issue with visitor accommodation while we can't build enough residential dwellings for our community.
And look, clearly the council has endeavoured to... We're dealing with a planning directive from the state government, and council has been frustrated in its efforts to have an alternative policy position that it can enforce around visitor accommodation in residential zones. So I think it's fair to say that officers share that frustration.
Thank you. So, it's pretty accurate to say that until the state government changes things for us, we're stuck with working within this scheme.
Yes, well, we are endeavouring to bring about that change in policy position, and happy. And I think I've provided some advice on that as part of the EM bulletin. So.
Thank you, Director, and I look forward to seeing that change in the future.
Thank you. Councillor Posselt and then Councillor Harvey.
I might go on for a little bit here, so just bear with me if I can. I'd start at the very start, which was the first deputation, Mr. Holt, who asserted that the primary frontage should be considered as Star Street, not as Jersey Street, as the planners have done in the report. Relying on the definition or the clause, I should say, of the scheme 11.4.2 that refers to primary frontage. Primary frontage is defined in clause 4.1.3 in the case of two or more street frontages, that the frontage with the shortest dimensions measured parallel to the road. Can planners or the director respond to why Short Street is not considered the primary frontage and Jersey Street is in that context?
I'll refer that to Mr. McClenahan.
Through you, Chair, I would align with the description in the planning scheme there being the shortest frontage to the road. I understand there's some changes to how that road is rated and the location and the provisions of some road blockages there, but to the best of my knowledge, that we would view Star Street being the primary frontage, having the shortest.
So we view that, just to clarify, planners agree with the deputy, Mr. Short, that the primary street frontage is in fact Star Street and not Jersey Street, being the shortest dimensions measured parallel to the road, which is my interpretation as well. It's a long block.
Just doing some quick measurements as we
Yeah,
speak.
no, please take your time. That's fine. I'd appreciate accurate advice.
I would agree that the Star Street would be the shortest dimension of that corner block.
Thank you. So then the second kind of black letter planning consideration is that the Star Street frontage then needs to be compatible with setbacks of other Star Street residents, and that the Jersey Street residences and their frontages are irrelevant to the debate or the assessment of that condition, given that the primary frontage is Star Street, not Jersey Street. Is that correct?
I would say that where a proposal is not compliant with the acceptable solution of setback there, and then is therefore assessed under that performance criteria, that performance criteria doesn't make a difference as to the primary or secondary or more frontages, and that the compatibility is assessed within streetscape as a whole.
Right, so to clarify, the performance criteria throws the acceptable solution criteria completely out and says, so the acceptable solution says you must assess the primary frontage, but then when you go to performance criteria, the primary frontage, which of the frontages is primary is irrelevant.
The performance criteria says as verbatim, a dwelling must have a setback from a frontage that is compatible with a streetscape, having regard to any topographical constraints.
A frontage, not both frontages. Right.
Does it have a setback at all?
Just says that it has to be compatible.
But there isn't really one from either, is there?
Yeah, can you clarify if there's any setback at all on either side?
Councillor Posselt, would you like to move on to another question through to the Director, and we'll clarify that in the interim? Is that okay?
Yeah, certainly, that's fine. I did note on Performance Directive 6, subcategory C, that the scale of the development has to be compatible with the existing developments, and that the commentary from officers is that it's largely not compatible, although it's compatible with Grosvenor House next door. Grosvenor House is an outlier in when considered as a totality within the area. And so I'd be interested to hear further rationale from planners as to why they think that this this development does sit in the scale of existing development, given that the report itself says that Grosvenor House probably shouldn't be included because it's an outlier.
Yeah, look, I need to refer to the report, which I think addresses that point.
I don't think it does in any more detail than that, Director.
Well, look,
but please, I can certainly.
If you just bear with me, I'll
give you a chance. Yes.
Refer to the report.
Please, thank you.
So just bear with me.
It's at 6.7.7.
So 6.7.8, it goes on to and acknowledges Grosvenor House as being an outlier, but it goes on to say, however, the topography of the land within the area is considered to reduce the visual impact and therefore the effect upon character of the proposed building height. The site and adjoining land are at a point where the land transitions from the flatter land found around the Sani Bay rivulet to the south towards the sloping land found to the north and northwest. The land in these latter directions slopes upwards and away from the site towards Barracks Hill and Macquarie Ridge. This transition is illustrated by the significant difference in level between the sections of Jersey Street adjacent to the site and the adjacent section of Star Street, i.e. the land rises nearly 10 metres in elevation along the site frontage from the latter street. Both Grosvenor House and the proposed development would therefore be seen against the land to the north and northwest and below the existing development upon it when viewed from the south and southeast. So the officers have concluded that based on this topographical aspects that it is reasonable against that performance criteria.
Thank you, Director. Just to clarify on that point, does PD6C say that we should be assessing the visual impact of a dwelling's scale, or does it just say that we should be assessing the scale? Because while I appreciate that there's mitigating factors that can diminish the impact of scale, my reading of PD6 is that it just says the scale, and therefore the siting and visual impact is not part of that assessment.
Yeah, it talks about the scale of the use, and its compatibility with the surrounding character and uses within the area. So it's talking about the scale of the use.
PD6, the visitor accommodation planning directive.
Yeah. PD6 that's what you're referring to?
Yeah.
I thought it was more just a sort of like blanket rule and it wasn't really part of planning scheme. It's quite a separate document,
That's correct.
It's not about the way things look. It's literally just 200 metres. You don't get one.
No. If it's above 200 square metres, then it becomes a discretionary aspect, and then you're considered under the performance criteria.
Performance criteria for PD6. Oh, I see. For PD6, just those little shopping list of things. Yeah.
Yeah, I think, Director, it might be the second component of C, its compatibility with surrounding character in terms of, and I guess compatibility could be, and I'd be interested to hear your opinions, but the compatibility could, I suppose, include a visual assessment in compatibility.
Yeah, and I think what the officers are saying in their assessment is that the topography of the site reduces the incongruous nature of what might be perceived as being incongruous nature of it with adjacent properties, particularly in Star Street.
Yeah, thank you, Director. Did we have an answer to the first question?
With respect to the setbacks, I had a measurement of around 1.7 metres from the Star Street at the shortest point, and I believe it's referenced in the report of the proponent of a 0.3 metres from Jersey Street.
Thank you very much.
Yeah,
Councillor Posselt, any further questions?
Yeah, of course. So, to allay fears of the building damage, these types of developments are usually subject to a dilapidation report for surrounding properties. That would be instigated in this case?
Well, yes, again, not by council. This is governed under the Building Act, but is standard practice.
Understood. I've just got some pre-prepared questions, which I might just go to because this is a pretty unusual application, having covered off the specific kind of black letter planning ones. Although I'm not really satisfied with the frontage performance criteria assessment, and I suspect that if I refuse this, I will refuse it on those grounds, but I might come back to that in my debate. Have we ever seen an application like this since the Planning Directive 6 was instigated for a full commercial building, new build, under visitor accommodation guidelines?
Not in a residential zone, no.
Have we seen one in the commercial zone?
Yeah, yes.
For a whole new build? That's not a hotel?
Well, not a hotel. I mean, there's been serviced apartments that have been approved. One, Sandy Bay Road, I think that was a number of years ago now.
That was
not
prior?
Of this nature.
Prior to
that was prior.
Yeah. Thank you, Director. So, a question that came to my mind is, why is this being assessed as a commercial development rather than a residential development when we've got judicial findings that say short stay is the equivalent use of residential, and that's why we've lost some of our Supreme Court appeals? So how can this be considered a commercial development when the Supreme Court has held that it's essentially residential use?
Because the state government has issued a planning directive that says that we must. Thank
you, Director. And so has short stay visitor accommodation under that planning directive, Planning Directive 6, has that essentially replaced all other visitor accommodation applications as they were previously assessed? So a motel, for example, you could apply for the same usage under visitor accommodation rather than as a motel.
That's correct.
And how does this affect our evaluation as a council on rates and how we rate properties, if they're a commercial hotel or if they're a visitor accommodation, and prior to last year's decision they were residential rates being charged to visitor accommodation?
I simply don't have the answer for that, and that's not a relevant matter for the Planning Authority.
Thank you, Director. So this isn't an approval for a residential use. We've heard that. We've heard that the previous proposal had 12 units in it and it was rejected based on private open space provision, and that would then have to be reduced to 6. Are these types of applications essentially opening the door to circumvent things like solar access, visitor parking provisions, lower parking provisions, compared to a alternative motel existing visitor accommodation prior to Planning Directive 6 being applied?
Yeah, look, I can't comment on that. I can only go on the provisions that we're required to enforce.
And there's no provision for Planning Directive 6 to provide any form of communal space or private/public open space?
No, none.
So this development, that's one of the reasons why we're seeing this development built essentially to the boundaries and having, you know, some trickiness around compatibility in size and things, because there's no requirement to provide a backyard or a lobby.
Look,
under the scheme.
clearly the proposal that was approved ultimately at the Planning Appeal Tribunal was in a similar form, but not the same configuration. And it was the configuration that was the issue that Council rejected the proposal on. So the previous form was acceptable by the TASCAT.
Final question for you, Director, through you, Chair. Parking provisions, how many car parks are there provided?
12.
There are 12, so one per unit. And does that consider the planning scheme talks about 50% for ancillary uses? Is there any ancillary uses anticipated for this? No.
It meets the parking provision. Numerical requirements.
I will actually have one final question, which is just back to the first question. In light of looking at or reviewing the setbacks on Jersey Street and on Star Street, and the primary street frontage being considered Star Street, and looking at the setbacks, as was pointed out, I think it's to the southern side of Star Street, they're actually really extensive setbacks on that side of the street, which is the side of the development. Do officers have any further advice on that specific section of the scheme and how this adheres to it or does not adhere to it?
Chair, I'm really sorry. I actually have to just pop out for like 7 minutes to do an interview. So I hope I don't miss the vote, but I might.
Longer than 7 minutes, that's okay. Thank you. Mr. Noy.
Sorry, could you just repeat?
That's right. In light of just reviewing the point 3 and point 3 and 1 point, I think it was 1.3 metre setbacks for Star Street and Jersey Street, and on review of the Star Street being considered the primary frontage under the rules, do the officers have any further advice for us on that specific element of the scheme and if this complies or doesn't, or it could be contended?
Well, clearly the officer's advice is that it does comply to that requirement.
Thank you, Councillor Posselt. Councillor Harvey, did you have something to say? And then perhaps after you, I'd just like to...
Thanks, Chair. Look, we've got to come to a conclusion here. I don't have an issue per se with the development. What I have a big issue with is the constraints of the site. But that's not part of the decision making tonight. So I can't base my decision on that. I've got to base it on the planning considerations. And what we have is an officer's recommendation for approval. And we know from our experiences in the past where we've rejected officer recommendations and they've gone to TASCAT, usually they've been resolved by the overturning of the council decision and replacing it with the original officer's decision. That's happened on numerous occasions, and that's associated with not being able to find people to defend things in the tribunal. So we're not actually able to run a case, and that may or may not be the case with this one, but that's been the experience in the past. So because there's an officer recommendation for approval, and it's here because we get all the tough ones that come to the council meeting, and I'm glad that there's 5 of us that turned up tonight to discuss this matter. I'm going to move the officer's recommendation for approval, and we'll test the room to see what people think, and there might be an alternative recommendation as well. but I'll recommend the officer's recommendation because I think that there's no way around this necessarily, because I don't think we could defend this because it has that approval recommendation, and the issues that I have are not based on the planning scheme, they're based on the constraints and the difficulties of the site, and I can't base my decision on that.
Thank you, Councillor Harvey. Before we do go to vote, I'd just like to ask some of my own questions, and I thought it pertinent to provide some context because my confusion sort of stems from the context of this particular application. So it came to us in 2019 and it was for residential use for the unit for multiple dwellings. And as a result of that particular application, we refused it on that basis. That's correct. Is that right?
Yeah,
yes.
so it came before council for 4 dwellings. It was rejected by council and went to appeal. It was mediated at the appeal through amending the proposal to reduce the number of dwellings from 12 down to 6, and that addressed the density issues, and they were also able to demonstrate compliance with the amenity issues that were pertinent. And so ultimately council and the Planning Appeal Tribunal at the time ultimately approved the proposal. So it's been tested in that form, not configuration, but in that form before the tribunal previously.
Thank you. So I'm somewhat confused by the timeline and some of the information that's in the report, and I'll just go through it and then I'll ask you some questions if that's okay, just for the benefit of everyone that's here today. It was refused in the form of residential use as multiple dwelling, and our decision to refuse it was then appealed, as you've just outlined, and then there was a consent agreement. And so we issued a planning permit in 2020. An extension was then granted on that permit until November 2021, which then lapsed in 2024. But the information within the report then tells us that consent then came from the CEO in January 2024 for the current application. So I'm a little bit confused as to why a permit lapsed in March, but then 2 months before that, the CEO then gave approval, or consent was given in 2024 for this particular application. Could you just clarify the process for me? I'm just trying to understand it. Thank you.
So where a development might involve council-owned land, i.e. For example, on this site, the development is located obviously on the Star Street site, but it also impacts on the adjacent council-owned land. And under those circumstances, the Act requires where the development might impact on the immediate adjacent public land, then that public land authority must give consent for the lodgement of that application. So it's fairly common practice under those circumstances for the CEO, if the application is in order, to agree to the application being lodged and therefore considered. So it's simply consent to lodge the application that's been given by the CEO in this instance.
Great, thank you for clarifying that. I appreciate it. And then the report then further goes on to outline that that it's been approved as visitor accommodation, but for up to 3 months by an individual party, and then they can seek further approval for any part of it that is to be used for a residential use. But we said it couldn't be approved for residential use, and so it can only be now used for up to 3 months for visitor accommodation, but you could apply for a further use for residential use. So I'm a little confused, if you could clarify that.
Yeah, so the permit that's been applied for, and if council agreed with the officers that would be given, is for short stay visitor accommodation, and that is the land use is determined by the length of stay within the units that are being proposed. So a short stay is up to 3 months. Now, if they want to stay longer, then it then falls into a different class of use, which would be a dwelling, and that would therefore be a change of use would be needed to allow that to occur.
Okay, and I think Mr Holt actually alluded to it in his deputation. If after that 3 months it has perhaps changed use, how do we actually regulate that?
It's very difficult to do that. We would have to be notified, and the proponent would therefore then have to make formal application. As I indicated, in that circumstance, it would be in the applicant's potentially financial interest, given that short stay accommodation is rated much higher than a permanent dwelling.
So essentially you're saying there's no way for us to actually regulate that?
Very difficult to do that unless we're advised. Clearly the owner would have an obligation to advise council and to seek that necessary approval. But if the proponent did not do so, then it's very difficult for us to identify that change of use.
Okay, thank you. And I just had one question from the representation from Mr Stump, and he talked about that the report had said that it was 500 metres from the boundary line, but in effect, according to him, it's actually only 3 metres from the back wall to his boundary. Could we clarify, is there an error within the report?
I'm not sure whether Mr Stump was referring to the report within the Mercury,
okay,
as opposed to within the
right.
Either the officer's report or the proponent's report. Surprisingly, the Mercury might have got that one wrong. So.
Thank you very much for that, Mr Noy. Were there any further questions before I'd like to make some final comments?
Make some commentary. If that's
Sure, Councillor Posselt.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, to start with, I think that the PD6 is just this massive thorn in our sides, Planning Directive 6. It's a massive thorn in our sides that we've seen us challenge in Supreme Court and not win something that was logical and passed the community expectation test, but not pass the black letter law test of the way that directive is written. And this is another example of this directive being just open, slather, carte blanche, do what you want, and you can classify it as visitor accommodation as long as no one lives there for more than 3 months. You don't need to have the same solar access, you don't need to have the same parking requirements, you don't need to have open space that you can enjoy sunshine in. And those, like the rush of the state government to bring on PD6 to, you know, allow their mates who have short stay accommodation to buy up property and convert it to short stay has resulted in a really poorly drafted directive that now has led us to problems like this, and this is the first time we've seen it. We've talked about hotels by stealth in the past, where we're seeing apartments after apartment after apartment in the same building go to short stay, and we saw it as well in the Smith Street application, where we saw houses built ironically by the Benevolent Society in the 1880s, the entire lot being converted to short stay accommodation in one fell swoop. Now that application was withdrawn, but that's what this very poorly drafted directive has resulted in. And if I was in state government, it'd be one of the first things I would do is address this. I think we're at 800 short stay residences in the city, and the highest density of short stay of any capital city in the country. It's just the wild west of planning. I have a huge number of concerns about this. There's some building concerns that have been raised by the people in the room this evening that aren't relevant, but I do still have some planning concerns, and in this instance, if I need to provide you with some criteria if I'm going to refuse it, and I don't think that this meets the component of the planning scheme which allows for compatible setbacks the setback is not a setback on Star Street compared to its neighbours. There's a reason why those properties have large setbacks, and the reason is really simple. It's about habitability of the area, because that is the northern aspect. So the way that those residences get sunny open space is by pushing their setbacks all the way back, as opposed to the other side of the street who have pushed their residences all the way forward to have no setback and have all of the sun in their backyard. It's all about siting. But I'm not convinced all the same that this meets the scheme's requirements of 11.4.2. And so I think on that basis I will be refusing this application this evening, although I would be open to the idea of deferring this item for further advice given the volume and varied nature of concerns of elected members.
Thank you very much, Councillor Posselt. If there was no further commentary, I'd just like to make a few comments, final comments, if that's okay. Okay. Yes, so this is a very interesting application, and having read the reports, I did find it rather interesting, I think, when we referred to the visitor accommodation must be compatible with the character and use of the area and not cause an unreasonable loss of residential amenity, having regard to points A to F. Obviously, from reading the information, I think that it does have an impact on the privacy of adjoining properties. But in particular, I think what is also important is with regards to the right-of-way, which is F. Any impact on the owners and users' rights of way. Elected members perhaps did receive some information from community members with regards to impacts on their right-of-way. And I would like to note what has also been contained within the report, and that is this. With regard to subclause F, the proposal may have some impact upon the right-of-way over the northeastern part of the property. A driveway partly within this right-of-way provides access to the adjoining residential property to the northwest of the site at 7 Star Street. It is proposed to use part of this driveway and the access point to the Star Street to provide access to the car parking. I would like to proffer the idea that, in fact, what has already been contained in the report suggests that indicates that there would be an impact on the owners' and users' rights of way. And finally, I would like to point out what was contained in the report around performance criteria P3, the sitting and scale of a dwelling must. And must is also a very strong word. There is no movement around must. And what I would like to point out is A.3, which refers to overshadowing. Overshadowing of an adjoining vacant property. And I would like to read what the report actually said at 6.8.5. With regard to the above subclauses A1 and A2, the shadow diagram submitted with the application suggests that the proposed development would overshadow the adjoining Grosvenor House property, given that the proposed development would have a similar height to the habitable levels within this building. It also goes on to say at 6.8.6, the shadow diagrams show that the proposed development would overshadow the properties to the southeast of the site, on the opposite side of Jersey Street. I'd also like to point out at 6.8.8, the report says, the shadow diagrams also suggest that the proposal would overshadow the area between the dwelling at 3 Jersey Street and the frontage of the property. Of course, there is a however in that. But I also have a however too, because we're entitled to exercise our discretion. And on that basis of the sitting and scale of the dwelling of A.3, as well as what I've outlined regarding the right of way, I find it very difficult to approve this particular application. But I think the biggest and perhaps most important reason, maybe not reason is not perhaps the right word, maybe justification for why we could utilise our discretion to refuse this. The biggest catalyst being Directive 6 and the important note that's there in the report, which is that the acceptable solution A3 per Directive 6 for Clause 3 of the Planning Directive requires visitor accommodation to accommodate guests in existing habitable buildings and to have a floor area of not more than 200 square metres. Unfortunately, this particular proposal, the floor area is more than 200 square metres. And that then provides the impetus for us to be able to refuse it. And I think Mr. Noy has provided some of that basis already and he's pointed out acceptable solution A1 or the corresponding performance criteria P1 and also Directive 6 that it doesn't fall within the 200 square metres. But I would like to suggest that perhaps Councillor Posselt, if you wanted to either refuse it on the grounds that you have recommended for setback, or you could include the right of way that I've considered exercising my discretion on, and the overshadowing, and also the points that Mr. Noy has also pointed out there for us. Or alternatively, if you would like to move a motion to defer, which is of course a procedural motion, what would you like to do? Would you like to move the procedural motion, or would you like to move to refuse?
Deputy, I think we've got a motion to approve in front of us, so I'm happy. I'm happy to foreshadow a refusal.
Move that motion. Oh, okay.
Yeah, I'm happy to foreshadow a refusal, and when we get to that, I can articulate the grounds and with the officer's assistance.
Great, thank you very much. Councillor Harvey, would you like to say something else?
Just with regard to a deferral, if a deferral is refused by the applicant and the time limit expires, then the decision will be made by the director. Is that true?
Yes.
That's correct, but we do have a council meeting on the 28th of January, so we could bring the matter back before council to make a determination.
What would the refusal, what would the deferral allow us to do?
I would be in your hands as to what you would like me to do in that instance, but you know, that's simply to defer it, to give you more time to consider it.
Well, deferral would take it to a full council meeting.
That's correct.
Councillor Harvey, would you like to move a deferral motion?
Well, if we do defer it, then all 12... No? Okay, it looks like there's no appetite for deferral.
Okay.
So I'll go with the recommendation.
So you go with,
for
you've moved the approval, the officer's recommendation. Yeah. If there's no further comments, I'll actually put that for approval as per the recommendations of the officers. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
All those against say no.
Aye.
By show of hands, all those in favour of approval.
Councillor Kitsos, Councillor Harvey.
All those against.
Councillor Posselt, the Lord Mayor and the Deputy Lord Mayor. Motion is lost.
Thank you. So Councillor Posselt, would you like to move a foreshadowed motion for refusal and upon which planning grounds?
Yes, Deputy, if you can just give me a moment. And I would seek officers' input onto whether or not you've been listening to debate, whether or not I've missed anyone else's, and yours, Chair, anyone else's provisions. I'd also ask elected members to contribute if they have further reasons for refusal. But I would move that this item be refused based on 2 grounds, one of which has multiple clauses attached to it. So the first ground is the clause of the scheme, 11.4.2, which is brought by 11.4.9, which is related to street frontages being incompatible. And secondly, I would move that it is refused based on non-compliance with performance criteria from Planning Directive 6. And I'll just give you the numbers for that. So, Planning Directive 6, P1, listening to the Chair's commentary on P1, grounds P1C, the scale of the use and its compatibility with the surrounding character and uses within the area, specifically on compatibility and scale elements, which are the items I raised, along with the Chair's recommendation for item F, impact on owners and users' rights of way. But as I said, I would welcome anyone who wishes to include additional planning-related matters into the refusal.
Would you consider putting in the other aspect that I noted about foreshadowing, the performance criteria P3, A2, the sitting and scale of dwelling must not, overshadow adjoining vacant property, and it outlines within the report that it potentially does.
If that is the assertion that it is outlined in the report that it does potentially overshadow, then I'm happy to include that, Deputy.
Well, it certainly a discretion, so in which case you have the right, whether you can defend it before the Planning Appeal Tribunal. Clearly the officer's view that overshadowing is not in breach of the performance criteria, but you might have a different view.
Director, may I ask, is there any issues with the items that I've identified from a administrative perspective as items for refusal?
Not from an administrative point of view, clearly on merits.
That fight can be fought at TASCAP?
Yes.
Yep.
Councillor Posselt, were you also intending on including the 2 points that the Director had noted as the basis for your foreshadowed motion for refusal?
Can we have those up on the screen as a reminder of what they were?
Because it comes from qualified advice, so it may be...
Well, no.
Opinion.
Yeah. These were put forward for your consideration. They weren't recommended by the officers. I want to make that very clear.
Yep.
Deputy, after the conversations around the table, I think I would be happy to include the first point but not the second, given that across the road is this fairly sizable motel. Mm-hmm. I don't think that that's a rationale in my view.
You'll just put in Planning Directive 6 that it's above the 200 square metres. Is that what you've noted in your...
No, so I haven't noted anything about being over 200 square metres. I've only noted that the performance criteria associated, P1, with that clause which you've outlined, which is that visitor accommodation must be compatible with the character of the area and not cause unreasonable loss of amenity, residential amenity, with concerns about C, compatibility and scale, and F, impact of existing residents through the impact on owners and users' rights of way.
But not the character and use.
Not the character and use because there's a motel across the road, and I think it's pretty hard to argue that it's too far from it when it's 50 metres from a large motel, in my view.
Sorry, Councillor.
No, please, Chair.
Can we just get some advice on Planning Directive 6 that relates to, as it's been noted in the report at 6.7, that the application is over the 200 square metres?
Yeah, so what that is about is that's the acceptable solution.
Yes.
So once it's in breach of that acceptable solution, then you're directed to the performance code.
Sorry, I'm a little bit confused right now. So you said before that the Planning Directive 6 was on its own tangent and it was something that had to be satisfied on its own because it was a state.
Yes.
Yeah, and then, but when you're talking about the planning scheme, obviously we go through the acceptable solution performance criteria aspects. Yeah. So if Directive 6 is...
Planning Directive 6...
Oh, sorry, so yes, okay,
part
with
of
the planning scheme stuff, yes, okay.
It still has acceptable and performance
yes.
criteria.
Okay, yep, thank you.
So if everyone's clear on that, I'll move it for refusal.
Those four grounds.
That was including the first point of stuff? Yes.
That was the fourth one? Sorry, make that 5. So I've got the street frontage 11.4.3 and there's 4 components of the planning directive: the scale of use PC1, C, F, also...
See this, that's on compatibility and surrounding character and scale.
Yeah.
Yep.
Impacts of owners' rights of way, F. The overshadowing one, Michael, can you... Is that...
Dr. Sherlock, I think you had the performance criteria for that one.
Yeah, so the performance criteria was P1, so P3. P3 is the sitting and scale of the dwelling, and it was A3, the overshadowing.
P3, yeah, yes, okay, yep. And the final one being the one that is up on the screen, number 1. All right, okay, I think...
So did anybody need that reread?
No, I think we're right.
We're okay? What we're voting on? Okay, so that's the foreshadowed motion for refusal. Foreshadowed motion for refusal, put forward by Councillor Posselt. All those in favour? Aye. All those against? All those in favour?
Councillor Posselt, the Lord Mayor, Deputy Lord Mayor.
Against?
Councillor Kitsos and Councillor Harvey. The motion is carried.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And we will now move on to item 6.1.1, 50 Macquarie Street, Hobart signage.
So moved. The officer's recommendations, Chair.
Thank you. Let's move for approval. Is there any further comments, questions? No, being none, we'll vote on that. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
All those against? It's carried unanimously. Thank you. Applications under the Hobart Interim Planning Scheme 6.2.1, 479 Sandy Bay Road signage, moved by the Lord Mayor. Are there any comments or questions? Yes, Councillor Posselt.
Thanks, Chair. Just to clarify, I've clarified with officers, but the heritage requirement to keep the jet fuel sign, which to me seems like a little bit of a venture into preserving heritage that's not original and doesn't contribute to built form but contributes to usage of a building's history. The jet fuel sign is not the original sign on this for this building, but it's not our officers in Hobart City Council that have determined that the jet sign should be retained. It's in fact the Tasmanian Heritage Council. I don't agree with it, but I understand, and just seeking clarification from the Director, I understand that if it's a directive from the Tasmanian Heritage Council, then we don't have a say.
You're partly correct.
Well, good. Clarify for me, please, sir.
So the part relating to the Heritage Council making the determination that that sign should be retained. The officers, and this has been previously condition of approval that that sign be retained as part of a previous application that council agreed to, and the officers have reinforced that with a similar condition to the permit. So reinforcing a previous council decision that that sign should be retained.
Staffing more than the Heritage
No, the Heritage Council, the Heritage Council has agreed with our previous position in relation to that. So,
Can I clarify by narrative?
Yep.
This council determined at some point in the past that the jet sign should stay.
That's correct.
That decision has potentially impacted the Tasmanian Heritage Council's view on that sign.
very rarely do we have influence over the Heritage Council's determination on such matters. They came to that conclusion independently of council officers.
Yeah, thanks. In the heritage report, the only reason for the condition, so changes to existing jet service station sign which projects from the port chair are not approved. The reason for the condition is like 8 words: to retain a meaningful remnant of past use of this place.
Beautiful.
It's so weird because there was that, do you remember, Bill, there was that, or Councillor Harvey, there was that nice old service station in Newtown? And we
After the 1920 service station.
We wanted them to retain the facade and build the apartments behind it.
No, it was more than that. We didn't want them to demolish the entire thing, and there was one word in the scheme that left us exposed, and we couldn't defend it in the tribunal. It was
Yes.
a word.
It's so strange that a sign is so, they hang on to that, but
Yeah.
a whole sort of 1920s deco facade of a servo. It's where those apartments are opposite the Green Store.
It's slightly different. I think that the jet service station is listed by the Heritage Council. It's part of the Tasmanian Heritage Register, so that has protection by the Heritage Council. And in relation to the Newtown Road example, that was just locally significant, and we tried to refuse that under heritage grounds, but ultimately it was found that we couldn't sustain that refusal before appeal tribunal, given the provisions of the scheme at the time.
Is the jet service station older than 1920s? Is it?
No, I think it may in part be some of its architectural qualities. It's were more intact and more significant than the Newtown Road example.
My view, my eyes. The 1920 service station was a classic, and that's it. They're extinct.
Thank you, Councillor Harvey. Were there any further comments? Any questions? No? Being none, we'll put that. All those in favour say aye. Those against?
No.
By show of hands. All those in favour?
Councillor Kitsos, the Lord Mayor, Councillor Harvey, Deputy Lord Mayor.
All those against?
Councillor Purcell, the motion is carried.
Thank you very much. We will now move on to report 7.1, delegated decisions report planning. Were there any?
So moved.
Thank you, Councillor Harvey. Were there any questions, comments? No? Nope, that's it. Now move on to 7.2, planning advertising report. Can I have somebody move that, please?
Anything interesting there, through you, Chair, to the Director?
I'll refer that one to Mr McClenahan, who will bring to our attention anything of note.
Through you, Chair, look, there was the decision of the Kodak located building on Elizabeth Street Mall. That was a change of use to visitor accommodation and food services, so that's been approved under delegation. There's a conversion of a, I'm not familiar with the existing use, but in Newtown, Leonard Valley, I think it's 2 Creek Road, to a childcare centre, which is council land, which will be coming to the planning committee, I believe, the next round. And change of use from residential care to education for the Sacred Heart College. In terms of scale, that was of note.
Great, thank you very much for that overview. And then we have 8 responses to questions. Sorry, vote? Yes, sorry. I think, who moved that?
I'll move.
Yeah, Councillor Harvey, sorry. Thank you. So, all those in favour?
Aye.
Those against?
Carried.
Thank you, carried unanimously. Number 8, responses to questions without notice.
Move that they be noted.
Thank you very much, Councillor Harvey. That's both 8.1 and 8.2, or just 8.1. Thank you.
And
8.2.
Be received and noted.
Yep.
Yes.
Thank you.
Do we need to move that, Justin?
I think Councillor Harvey moved it, but did well.
Yep. All those in favour?
Aye.
All those against? Okay.
Oh, sorry. No.
Carried unanimously.
So I just lost focus then, yeah.
Thank you. Number 9, questions without notice. Are there any questions? Yes, Lord Mayor.
I did give notice of them,
And
so I don't know whether you want to give any verbals or some of them are take on notice.
Yeah, look, I had charged Miss Aby with the task of pulling all these together, and unfortunately she's away sick today, so we'll take them on.
You don't need me to read them all out?
No, no, you've
Got them here.
yes, if
So they all relate to visitor accommodation.
Yeah.
So I'd love to submit those, and do have a couple of others, but I think Councillor Kitsos got one related to visitor accommodation.
Yes,
Councillor Kitsos.
I do, Chair. If I could just get an additional question onto the list of the Lord Mayor's visitor accommodation questions, just in relation to the use of sunset clauses and visitor accommodation permits, if we could take some advice around when it would be appropriate to use those.
I'll take that one on notice and capture it. Yep.
Is it possible for those all to come back into more of a report format that we can discuss? Like a briefing? Take it on notice.
Yeah, I'll take that one on notice. Well, it'll be a fairly extensive response.
I mean, but as a question, we can't then discuss it.
Yeah, I mean, well, you can't necessarily direct the officers through a question without notice. That would have to be a notice of motion, that you'd call for a report covering those.
Or maybe the CEO might have a view on whether it's better to prepare.
Yeah, I think leave it as questions, clearly, and whether we choose to respond to that in an update report on those matters. Yep.
I did have another couple of questions. One is, what is the time frame for putting the CHP height limits into our LPS?
Yes, this year.
That's when we'll start the process.
That's when we'll start the process. There will be, Council will be getting some updates of some of those provisions, the thinking around some of those provisions in the next month or the month after in workshops. So we want to share with you some of the built form controls that we are thinking might be applicable. So
better or more nuanced? Or
more nuanced, more refined, with some visual representations of what that might look like in a more broad scale perspective than what was previously provided within the plan itself. So But yeah, it's my desire that we have something back before council with statutory provisions this year, this calendar year.
What's the specific legal barrier to us making it compulsory to take projects over a certain size to our design advisory panel? And can the response to this question identify the specific difference between Hobart and Fremantle, where I think it is compulsory?
Yes. Look, I'll take that one on notice, but I'm happy to have a conversation about that. But I think it requires a considered response. So.
Yeah, it's the specific legal barrier.
Yeah.
We often get to, oh, you can't do that, but it's like, well, what is that?
Yeah, well, I don't, look, and I'll provide a written response,
Yeah.
but I don't believe there is any legal barrier to referring any matters to the Urban Design Advisory Panel. It's just set out in the terms of reference for that panel. It's not a statutory entity at all.
But I think we give a bit of choice, don't we?
We do.
Whereas to make it compulsory over a certain size, you must go to our design advisory panel.
Oh, sorry. You're talking about an applicant going prior to a formal application. That's the circumstances you're...
Yeah.
Yep. No, I'm happy to provide, but I don't think we can. But you raise an example of Fremantle that does have some statutory standing.
May I just interject related?
Oh, yeah.
Is that okay? Chair, sorry, it doesn't require, I don't want a written response, but would this be a matter that could be resolved with bylaw, or that would be the only...
I don't think we can... I don't believe we can introduce a bylaw that might extend the provisions of an act that control such things. So.
A final one was, what steps are being taken to pursue the council's decision to support a separate planning scheme amendment to support the heritage listing of the mountain?
I'll take that one on notice. And can you provide those to?
Exact wording?
Yes.
You know what I'm talking about, though, don't you?
Yes.
Yeah.
And it would be, and we'll provide a written response, but that would have to occur once the LPS is in place. Yep, and a considered case would have to be developed, because there has been a proposition put forward as part of the LPS
by some other people.
By some other people, and it wasn't sufficiently resolved to be considered, is my understanding.
Councillor Harvey.
What provisions could the council consider to limit the impact of large vehicles in the city? Take it on notice.
Well, look, I will take it on notice, but we don't control necessarily the licensing and laws around vehicle size.
What steps, second question, what steps could the council consider to influence the state government to change the provisions that would limit large cars in the city?
That would be a lobbying exercise with the state government, either directly or through Legat, as a statewide response.
Another one now. Could the council lobby? Could a brief report be prepared to the satisfaction of Councillor Harvey, covering the topic of oversized vehicles dominating the city?
I would suggest that that's a notice of motion.
Okay.
And can I just add? Can I just add something to the answer? We had an intern who did a little paper that I should send you because she did look at what some other cities are doing.
Yeah. Adelaide's taking action, which is a bit dumb, in order to increase the size of the garage.
Yeah, and I'll send you her. I haven't looked closely enough at her report, but she does have a review of what some other cities are doing, and there is a bit of activity around the place.
Yep.
Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you. I'm sure Jason can take the gist of the question rather than the preamble. It's an augmented version of Councillor Harvey's question, which was as related to the development application that we just reviewed in Sandy Bay. Vehicle sizes that are used for swept path analyses appear to be, I want to say it was class 79 that Mr Gartrell... 85, thank you. Mr Gartrell referenced. But those sizes are a vehicle length of 4.9 metres and a vehicle width of 1.87. That does not include vehicles that are not even in the class that Councillor Harvey is referring to. A Hilux is longer, a Prado is wider. Why does the planning scheme allow that class of vehicle to be used as the swept path analysis and parking space size in light of 55% of vehicle sales exceeding that size?
I'd have to take that on notice.
Yes, you would. Thank you.
Can you provide that in writing?
The crux of the question is why is that vehicle size used when 55% of vehicles exceed that size? And how could it be changed?
You got a more enthusiastic response than I did. Yeah.
Are there any further questions? Any further questions? No? No questions? Great, thank you very much. Number 10, can I have somebody move that we close the open? Thank you very much, Councillor